Okay, good afternoon. We are going to have our third discussion about conservatism. Again, I'm Matthew Spalding with Hillsdale College. For those of you that joined us, great to have you. For those of you that are just joining us, great that you've joined us for this conversation about the media and big tech and conservatism. Once again, we have a great mix of people here. I guess I'll do that. We'll start with that first. So we have Chris Butler, who's the Executive Director of Americans for Tax Reform. Dan Gainor, who's the Vice President of Business and Culture for the Media Research Center. He heads up both MRC Business and MRC Culture departments. Ash Kazaryan, like Kardashian. She's Director of Similarities at TechFreedom. And John Schweppe, who's the Director of Government Affairs for the American Principles Project. So we have a nice mix of people to have this conversation with. But before we start, as with our last panel, we're going to have a little opener from Logan Cook. Some of you might know him as Carpe Donktum in Twitter. I'm going to let him tell his own stories of what's going on, but I liked his self-description as an eternally sarcastic meme-smith. So, please, Logan, thanks for joining us.
Hello. I am Carpe Donktum. For those of you that don't know, it's pretend Latin, which means seize the donkey. So it's sort of political. If you had told me 3 years ago that I would be here at CPAC talking to all you guys, I would have called you a lying, dog-faced pony soldier. So this was never something that I thought that would ever happen. You know, it's sort of something that just organically happened. And I've talked to lots of people over the last day or so, fans and all that kind of stuff. And thank you guys all for watching. That's why I'm here. So what I do want to talk to you about is an issue that with the censorship that has sort of started. I think it's really started with Reddit. There is if you don't know what Reddit is, it's a place where you can post memes and text, all kinds of stuff, videos. And there is a very large community there called the Donald. And the Donald was instrumental in at least I believe, in Donald Trump's election. That was where a lot of people got their funny memes that they shared all over social media. That's where a lot of people posted things when they saw the media lying about things. That's where they would post it. That's where things started, and then they would go viral on the other platforms. In the last year, Reddit has done what they call a quarantine. Quarantine puts up a stop sign anytime you try to visit the site and says, there might be dangerous stuff. Like, it doesn't say exactly what it might be, but it says, this might be dangerous, don't do this. And that has become what all of the other platforms are also starting to do, where they quarantine people and they make sure that, oh, don't talk to that person, they're very scary. They say lots of weird things and you won't like them. That is what they're trying to do because banning doesn't work because it actually backfires. But if you can quarantine somebody and make sure that everyone just fears to talk to that person or look at that person, then you can effectively silence their voices. So what I hope we can do with this panel is talk about how we can fight that censorship and how we can move forward in the future so that the 2020 election is just as bright as the 2016 election was. And without social media and without all of you and myself and other people on this stage being able to speak out and point out the lies of the media and the Democratic Party, it will be very hard for us to win 2020. So this is I think one of the most important issues that we can address, and I hope that we can address it with this panel. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Doug. So everybody here knows a lot more about this stuff than I do, but I'll do my job of just throwing out questions and helping to shape it a little bit. But that was a nice setup to ask the basic question. Is and to what extent might big tech be a threat to liberty? Is it its bigness? Is it its technology? Well, what's or is this not really this blown up to something that more than we think it is. It seems to me that that kind of thing and what the principle of the matter is what should guide us in figuring our way through this. So I'd like your thoughts on the general question first before we get into some particulars. So who would like to start?
You just start to work down.
Go ahead. Or just,
So I think the answer is yes. And there's two major problems when it comes to big tech. We have a concentration of power in a few incredibly large multinational corporations. And then the second thing is that we've seen that these corporations are willing to exert that power to censor or remove content that would probably indict every single person in this room. And so when we talk about the future of social media and the future of conservatism, the concern here is that these very large companies that basically dominate the social media space, will they have the ability to suppress what we believe? Will they have the ability to declare that it is hate speech to say that there are two genders and remove you from their platform? Will they have the ability to, people talk about Russia and how concerned we should be that Russia might interfere in this election. I'm like 100 times more worried about Google. Okay, so that's kind of the situation we're in, and I think it's as conservatives we need to recognize that and then chart a path forward.
good. So now as before, we've got kind of one side, another side, not to set up a date, but to set up a conversation. Let's go over here for. I mean, Ash or Chris, is this a concern? Is it overblown? Is it how would you divide that up differently? Is it?
So I'd like everybody to try to imagine Donald Trump becoming president in 1980, when President Reagan became president. I think it'd be totally impossible. And the reason is because the media was so controlled by, in those days, a very small cadre of left-wing entities. People like the Washington Post and the New York Times and NBC and CBS and ABC. We didn't even have Fox News yet. So in that environment, it would have been totally impossible to elect somebody like President Trump. He simply wouldn't have been given sufficient credit. And as an organization like Americans for Tax Reform, where we have been around since the 1980s, I can tell you that right now we have access to viewers and to people to read our content that never existed before in those days. I mean, back in the 80s, we had to invent direct mail, actually, in the late 1970s, to give a little bit of historical perspective. That was our first step to try to get around this media juggernaut that was so difficult for us to get around. Richard Viguerie and other founding fathers of direct mail invented this for the purpose of getting around this, so that they could directly reach individual voters. But it turned out that the solution to really be able to reach all these voters was liberty, and what grew up from liberty in terms of these social media networks, user-generated content through things like blogs before we had social media as we know it today. For the first time, we as conservatives were able to reach people more directly and get these eyeballs. That's why we had like the forum on Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, where we're able to reach out with these pithy messages and finally capture people to be able to elect somebody like Donald Trump. And I think that we need to preserve what we have today, this amazing ability to reach people. And I think Ash is probably likely to talk a little bit about the mechanism for that being able to work. But when we talk about censorship, we also have to talk about censorship of corporate speech. And it's our unwillingness to censor that corporate speech that has ironically allowed this proliferation of viewpoints that we've never enjoyed on the right in the history of this country. And so I don't want to go on too long.
We'll get into the particulars, okay. But so an expansion of the market has been overwhelmingly important and good. But what do you think of that?
I also head up our MRC's Tech Watch project, and all that sounds past tense. And in fact, if you, even in your definition, a lot of your description, you were using past tense, and that's accurate. It's all past tense. 2008, Barack Obama used...
Would we agree with that, though? We agree that the rise of this technology has actually expanded liberty, and that's a good thing.
And the reason why so many conservatives were online...
You'd rather be in the world where ABC and CBS...
No, I think
controlling the media? We're in that world now?
We're agreeing in that point.
The Tech Watch world. So the reason why conservatives are so powerful online is because we're so badly treated by the traditional media you were mentioning. So conservatives went online. But take a look at the politics for a second. 2008, Barack Obama won the election with some involvement online social media, particularly Facebook. 2012, he had a pretty sophisticated operation, won again. And that was great. Everybody was singing the praises of free speech. And then 2016 rolled around and Donald Trump won with a combination of social media, Twitter bombacity, and Facebook sophistication, and everything freaking changed at that point. And suddenly the tech world, which loved free speech, turned around and said, oh, this is bad. The major media, which allegedly loved free speech, now wanted the tech world to restrict this. Politicians, the left, everybody suddenly started cracking down. A lot of the things that we all talk about are past tense. Reddit used to be a really wonderful free speech platform. Facebook, Twitter, they've all added and piled on hate speech rules, community standards, massive ways to restrict content. They've all done it, some of them more so than others, some of them very blatantly. So when we talk about this, we are talking about, to use your point, the most powerful companies in human history. More powerful even than the British East India Company, and they had a military. So I mean, reaching 2.5 billion people, almost the entire population equivalent of China and India, reaching 92% of global search, the ability, according to Dr. Robert Epstein, to possibly influence the election and turn 15 million votes just by how you do search. So we're talking about liberty. I'm all for the internet that you were describing, and we don't have it anymore.
So Ash, I want you to step into this, and we'll
Sure.
get into particular, but I just in
I imagine
the
Ash, you're gonna have
general
a lot of fun
conversation.
today.
How are we to understand this, and how should we think our way through it?
Okay, so hi everyone. I can't believe I'm doing this because I'm here to convince you at a conservative conference that government shouldn't regulate speech. That used to be like very easy to do, but apparently we are in this new digital era. And I'll start with a personal story. I was born and raised, and I went to college in Russia. And I saw what happened when government started regulating speech there online. And it was all under, national security, and we're protecting the democracy, which didn't exist. We're protecting all these things. And obviously, United States is not Russia, and you have democratic institutions. But it's way easier to fall into over-regulating speech than you think. And the United States has always had the strongest First Amendment protections in the world. And I think this conversation very easily, and you'll see that, is going to lead us into very, very murky territory of let government have a ministry of truth. Let government be policing truth. And while I'm sure a lot of people have problems with tech companies or big tech, even though they're all very different and it's a whole separate definition story, it's a very, very scary, slippery slope that can lead us into 1984.
So I find myself in the odd position where I agreed with both sides. The points you've all made, I agree with. So explain to me, you guys are the experts. I don't like government regulations. I don't like government telling us what we should and should not say. So I agree with that. But I have to admit, it really scares the bejesus out of me when a search engine that's so powerful that it could potentially manipulate elections and change outcomes. How am I to think that? I mean, I'm a
So
conservative
can newspapers? Newspapers can regulate the public opinion and change outcomes.
Everybody uses search engines now, and maybe I'm correct, maybe I'm wrong, but you can change what information comes up. That seems to give somebody a lot of control over opinion that's different from whether I choose or not to. I mean, is the market big enough, to go to your point, that this is not? Am I overreacting? Is this not a concern, or it's? I tell you, it seems. I seem to think that seems to be a problem with self-government when somebody has that much authority and power. But maybe I want to hear an answer from both sides on this. So.
Well, I would just say, just responding to what Ash said about newspapers, the difference is that every journalist in America Googles to research their stories and do it. Google is like the original source of information now. So this idea that Google has 92% of that market and can determine what we think about basic things, what ideas exist, it is very dangerous. So we just have to recognize that the idea that newspapers are on the same footing as Google is a totally different thing. And I just wanted to address that.
Is this a? I mean, I
Well, I think it's okay to be concerned, and one ought to continue to be vigilant in this space. But the fact is that Google is constrained. I mean, they're constrained by ordinary market forces, and I mean, you laugh, but you know, I don't. My regular go-to search engine is DuckDuckGo, and I use other search engines all the time. I think that there are a lot of other options for obtaining all of this. The interesting thing is that actually far fewer people find their news by simple Google searches now. And what's the reason for that? The reason for that is because Twitter and Facebook already exist now. So there actually is competition in this space. I mean, YouTube has competition, and they have competition that comes from these other entities that we're all mentioning. I mean, this is the only space I've ever seen where the monopolies, there are 4 monopolies in the same space that are functioning and competing against each other. It's like, how is this a monopoly?
But doesn't this feel a lot like saying, here's a free speech zone over here. You can go over here, but out here where everyone's actually paying attention, you know, we're not going to let you say what this is and this is. I mean, you have to offer some content moderation, or the platform collapses. I mean, that's the whole reason that all this came to be in the first place. Is there was, you know, I'm sure you guys are well aware of the Prodigy and CompuServe cases, and how there was these 2 competing models about content moderation versus the other. The fact is that if you don't moderate content, it slips down into a sewer. I mean, you see that all the time. Unfortunately, we saw that with Gab when people tried to create this separate entity that had no content moderation. It was just immediately taken over by virulent racists. You have to offer some kind of content moderation, or you have something that's filled with hate and pornography. And nobody wants that. In fact, that was a primary motivation for allowing content moderation, is to allow people allow network owners to police things like pornography.
But so what we've got in effect is we replaced government censor, because I think the idea of governments restricting speech is horrific. The idea of, you know, these hate speech policies, for all the companies have hate speech policies, they're all horrible. And the only thing I can think of worse would be a government hate speech policy. And, you know, imagine us living under a hate speech policy mandated by the EU. I mean, that'd be horrific. But that said, we instead of having one censor or, you know, multiple censors around the globe, we just got multiple censors who run these multiple companies. And because of course we get into the issue about their private companies, but they're all working with governments around the world. They're all, you know, Facebook is working with, you know, the EU, and, you know, Twitter is, and they're all signed on to this agreement about restricting, you know, what they call hate speech around the globe, the New Zealand agreement.
To be fair, Facebook refused to work with China and to submit to China's speech regulatory policies.
But they're working with New Zealand, and New Zealand isn't a friend of free speech either. So what we're doing.
So you want to join the club of New Zealand and China in terms of enforcing codes on these companies? That's what you're suggesting?
No, what I'm saying...
I don't want to be part of that club.
The best solution is these companies embracing the ideals of the damn country they live in, and that's America. And that's the ideal, not the law, the ideal.
So China enforces their policy on these companies, and we enforce ours. So I don't want to enforce our policy.
Again, so we're trying to look for a way we can find some common.
Can I?
What I want to know from Ash here, the Section 230 thing. What's going? Tell me more about that, because there are some things out there like the Decency Act.
Okay, so the Decency Act, it's one of the major laws that made internet possible, and it was passed in 1996. And John will tell you that it's a sweetheart deal to the internet companies, even though internet companies didn't exist for like a decade after it was passed. So I don't know who they were dealing with. But Section 230 was the only part of the Communications Decency Act that survived the constitutional challenge. So not going to go into legislative history and bore you to death, but basically there was a separate bill that was based off bipartisan. It was Representative Wyden and Representative Cox, and they looked at those 2 cases, Prodigy and CompuServe, and they said, this is crazy. Precedent right now is allowing pornography to stay on because this company didn't want to deal with it, and this company that dealt with it got punished. So we have to change this. So the provision basically says platforms are not liable for third-party content, basically as long as they act in good faith. That's it. What happened was the Communication Decency Act, the rest of it was like trying to limit pornography online, and the court found it unconstitutional because that's how strong First Amendment principles are in America. It was Reno versus ACLU. Again, not going to bore you as the only lawyer in this panel. I'm sure you already hate me just to begin with. But the thing is, Section 230 was able to give us platforms, social media platforms, where people can exchange their ideas and not just listen to others talk. And I really, every time people say, oh my God, Facebook is too big, Google is too big, well, 10 years ago it was Yahoo and MySpace, and no one thought they were going to go away. And the problem is that if we try to push them under our thumb and like regulate them, nothing is going to come of it. Whereas if we just let the market forces work, like we, I'm sure, all love them. We love market forces. The young generation, I'm a millennial, so I can say young generation now because we're not young anymore. The young generation are all on TikTok, and I don't even know what the other platforms are called. But that innovation is not coming from America, it's coming from China. And unless you want all of the data of the next generation to be in the hands of a Chinese government, you have to let innovation in America grow.
So
we're going to have questions at the end of the panel, sir.
We're going to have questions.
Thank you.
We're not against, we're in favor of allowing this technology to grow. You guys are not completely opposed to, should be some sort of moderation. Is there any, do we have an agreement here on anything?
No, we definitely have I mean, look, innovation's really good, and Section 230 at the outset was really good. And as Dan hinted to before, things changed in 2016. Before we had, the platforms basically adhering to this idea of a digital public square where, we were talking to each other, where free ideas were able to flourish, and that's changing fundamentally. And so we have to, as conservatives, reevaluate just out of a practicality standpoint. I mean, we're looking right now at a situation where, again, as I've said, and we're seeing it more and more, basic ideas that 4 years ago would have been standard. But like this idea that, there's two biological sexes, male and female, if you go say that on Twitter, go say it to Charlotte Clymer. You'll get banned for 24 hours. You'll get banned from the platform. You can't do it anymore. And so I think we really need to recognize from a practical standpoint.
Right, but the only solution that is offered is to control the speech of the company that's doing it, is to do a masterpiece cake shop onto Twitter. That's your only solution.
No, it's not the only solution.
Because Twitter has its free speech rights too.
These companies are some of the most sophisticated data companies ever. They could absolutely set up user preferences. So if you're triggered, that's the appropriate word for the generation, if you're triggered by seeing somebody saying that, then you don't see it.
Isn't it called the block button?
Yeah.
Sure, but they don't.
No.
But they don't have to do that.
They don't have to do it. So what we've done with our laws is we've helped create companies that then turn around and are...
Yeah, our laws like the U.S. Constitution and the First Amendment.
Then turned around using massive market power and, whether they are, too powerful, whether or not, they're certainly using Section 230 to go around and to, instead of censoring pornography, which is what the law was initially hoping to do, now they censor political speech.
Well, so the law that was
a free
found
nation can't
unconstitutional.
survive if online, all the ways we communicate, we are censored.
User-generated content cannot survive absent curation and moderation. User-generated content simply cannot survive. It immediately descends into a sewer. So you have to allow companies to police the content that's on their networks.
So why not, for instance, let's just say, suppose I want the G, the PG, the R, and the PG-13 versions of Facebook. PG-13, you can say anything you want. R, you can't, R, some restrictions. They could do that. You could do that. They couldn't do it.
Of course
tomorrow.
they could do that. You
Right.
could do that.
Yeah.
Why don't you do that? They're Facebook, not you.
Yeah, because one, even Google failed competing against Facebook. So don't presume that these almost trillion-dollar companies are easy to compete with. They're not.
Oh, no,
So
they're
I
not
think-
easy to compete with because every time they have an entrant that attempts to do this, it constrains their behavior.
And then they buy them.
Okay, so I think it's a good point right now to quote the White House economic report that just came out last week. And just by premise, it was written by the Council of Economic Advisors of the White House, and they had to run and check it with basically every agency in the United States. And it said that on the antitrust level, on the competition level, big tech does not, it's not a threat. That's not me. That's the economist. I'm not an economist. I'm not that smart. That's the economist at the White House. That's what they say.
But on the value of free speech level and on the value of free expression level, they're absolutely a threat. And the same source, the White House, had 16,000 reports from users of censorship. So, I mean, it's a question of, okay, antitrust, complicated, probably not great for this panel, absolutely. But the First Amendment is very basic, it's very easy to understand, and we understand that if free speech is centered by private actors, who, by the way, don't have the consent of the governed, then that's a real problem.
So the 16,000 censorship reports that you are quoting to the White House was a website that the White House set up and said, complain if you think you've been censored. So I could have gone on and said, I think I've been censored. So they never vetted them or went through them.
That's not what I've heard from them.
On top of that, there are, 350 million people in America? So 16,000 out of them, is it only 16,000 conservatives in America? I'm sure there's more right now in this hotel. Honestly, that's just the proportion of it. Content moderation is hard. There are going to be biases. Each person in this room has a bias. I have a bias. And people who make the decisions or algorithms that are written by people obviously are going to have a leaning. But it doesn't mean that government can come in. You keep saying First Amendment, First Amendment. This is a private actor, the same private actor like the bake shop that Josh Hawley was defending when he was a lawyer. It's the same rule. So for decades, you were protecting the private actors' freedom of speech rights, but now you change your mind because they're run by people who are liberal?
No, it's not that they're run by people who are liberal. They're run by people who are liberal who inflict it on the American public. And who, and
Let's
so
go into
in
Facebook.
varying
Peter
degrees.
Thiel is one of the first investors in Facebook and still is on the board, last time I checked. Do you think he has a liberal bias?
Facebook is the one that recently actually came out and said that they were trying to be a little bit more pro-free speech than, so into Zuckerberg's credit. But then he goes to Europe, writes in the Financial Times saying, hey, we need global regulation of our platform.
And you want to give it to them.
Instead of American regulation,
I think it's
we might get European. That's really good.
As is usually the case, it's a misnomer to say that this side is in favor of all regulation and this side is in favor of no regulation, or at least no concern.
No, I think concern. I think concern is legitimate. Look, these guys are woke leftists.
Okay, so are there other ways?
That's a problem, right? But the solution is not to have the government policing it instead of them.
So
compared to their brethren on the left, they're doing a pretty damn good job.
We're trying to find some grounds, as opposed to going back to the same tired debates, which everyone has heard. Can we find some grounds to think that's true? Again, I ask a naive question. I'm an academic. I'm used to publishing and editing. If we publish something that we're held liable for that.
Right.
Does that model work here? And hold on. Why or why not does that model work here?
Because you read every single word in the thing you wrote, I'm hoping. But at the same time, think of a bookstore. The owner of a bookstore has not read and approved every word in the books. Actually,
but the publisher is responsible for what he publishes.
Right, but the platforms are not publishers. They host the content of other people. Facebook never sees. There are millions of posts that go on Facebook every day. No matter how rich they are, they will never be able to have enough people to moderate and approve each post. So you can never say they're a publisher just by the default because the scale of moderation is incredibly
Why do they
huge.
get to have it both ways, though? That's my question. Okay, so they can't possibly moderate everything, but then they're going to moderate specific conservative speech.
Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ community, the royal family. So many people have complained and said that social media platforms suppressed their speech. There was this Black Lives Matter activist that she posted an email with threats to her, and she got suspended for months, and she couldn't get out of it. This exists on both sides. Mistakes exist on both sides. The Economist recently did, I think, yes or no question, is The Economist liberal media?
Yes.
The Economist.
Yeah.
Okay. The Economist.
Liberal and globalist, too, by the way. So.
The Economist did this empirical data research that said that the news search doesn't preference based on the political view, but based on just other economic data. Anyway, my point is, you can't like, you can't just tell these companies, nerd harder. You can figure it out. You're wearing a hoodie and glasses. Looks like you can figure it out. You can't just make technology push them in the way that you want them to go. If you don't regulate them and you don't regulate speech, they're going to figure it out because half of America, if not more, is conservative, and they don't want to lose users. It's
they
money.
don't care. You got 2.5 billion users, as Facebook does. They don't care if they lose 100 million losers. That's the way they use this. So when you're talking about these companies, restricting speech, yes, they do. They don't reveal the data. So everybody says, well, you don't have any data on that. It's because every single person who goes online has a different experience online. The algorithm treats every one of us different. You have different likes, different content you prefer, different, it's impossible to do it without, of course, their data, and it's a black box, and they don't reveal it. But we know foundationally, founded by liberals, staffed by liberals, even the executives admit this, created liberal community standards, liberal hate speech policies, and then, we look and see how those policies are enforced, again, by liberals. It doesn't mean that everything they do is liberal, doesn't mean that they're always out to get us, but we've seen how this has changed since 2016, and to deny that is naive or dangerous.
So Don Jr. wanted to create Facebook for Trump supporters. If we go, and if that gets created, TrumpNet or something, they can have the name if they want it. If TrumpNet gets created, with the rules you suggest, whenever the next Democratic president, just by the laws of nature, will be, let's say President Warren in 30 years or something, she will be able to regulate that speech and say, go back, like she will play it back.
So my question to you guys is, okay, if there is a concern about the rise of woke capitalism, which you raised, what's the other way to, expansion of the market, more competitors, right? Elaborate on that more. Is it, if we actually have we have a common concern, is there something we could actually encourage?
Well, I would encourage as many actors as possible to enter the marketplace. I would encourage continued pressure on all of these entities. I think that as conservatives, we should actively pressure them to allow us to continue to communicate our message. But there are differences among all these different entities now. And the more that we can pressure them and the more that they can see the direction that people are going, the better it's going to be. The problem is, yes, they're woke and they're leftists that created these entities, but nonetheless, we have benefited tremendously from it, and we continue to do so to this day. So even with them turning the dials one way or the other, we continue to benefit from this marketplace that's going on right now to a tremendous degree. And I think there's real opportunity to continue to push for this direction. Compare, for example, compare what Zuckerberg has done on free speech and talking about the importance of free speech to what any woke leftist on any college campus has done. They will not sit in the same room with Zuckerberg anymore. Right. He is so far to the right, unbelievably, of these guys on the left on college campuses and their vision of free speech that they cannot tolerate him, that they have protests and they have activist organizations erupting within these tech organizations because they are resisting this pressure so strongly. My point, this is a microcosm of a larger problem about woke capitalism, and they are in a better place than we have any, that we could reasonably expect them to be, and it is to our tremendous benefit. And the reason that it exists that way is because of the legal structure that we have now. And to roll the dice on something where the government is controlling these entities it just seems incredibly unwise to me.
See, I haven't once argued for government regulation on this panel, but are they a problem?
That'd be a good question.
Should they change? Yeah, because they've created almost $1 trillion organizations based on laws that we created, and now they're turning them against us. And I agree that Facebook, particularly, has been better, although it's a ridiculous Washington Post story this week that said that they had a rightward shift because they won't shift further left. But
it's like budget cuts.
That's the traditional media for you. But the idea that we, as taxpayers, are underwriting our own cultural, religious, and political demise to woke capitalism and woke globalism, that doesn't sit well with anybody.
How are we
anyone-
underwriting it? What are we underwriting?
Because they built these companies using the 26 words. The 26 words that we...
The 26 words allow content moderation.
Yeah.
Which is
Right,
a
which-
requirement
which-
for their existence.
Right, which they have turned from
It's not like
regulating
oh, if we
porn-
just got rid of that, then everything would be okay.
No, but
that
they've turned.
ends
I'm not.
all content
I'm just saying
moderation
they've
needs
turned
to
from
be fixed.
regulating porn to considering conservative ideas to be pornographic and must be restricted. That's.
I think that's an exaggeration.
Okay, so I think the underwriting in the name of this panel and what all of us have said but wasn't mentioned is the public square. And the public square is this very main key point both in legislation and litigation that we should address. So but basically what John and Dan, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, are saying is they're saying these platforms are a public square and the rules of a public square should be applied to them. So, sorry, again, lawyer. The Marsh versus Alabama case was the case where a corporate town was owned by a company and Jehovah's Witnesses tried to, on the sidewalk, give out promotional materials. The court found that even though it's a company town, it's still a public square, so they can do it because First Amendment applies. Now, in 2017, in the Packingham case, Justice Kennedy, who's now retired, so he can't make decisions anymore, he said he called the internet a public square, and that's where all this madness had started and took half of my work time. And then Justice Alito was like, he wrote a separate opinion. He was like, whoa, 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 that's really dangerous. You should not have said that, dog. And then that just was left there. And since then, people like us go on panels and we argue if the internet is a public square or not. So let's get to that idea. You think it is?
I say, okay, they don't have to be the public square, then no 230 immunity, period. That's what it comes down to. That's
Why?
what's made the
Why?
nine-figure...
No, but where's
No.
the jump?
No, I'm just saying that's what it comes down to. We believe that look, you've been
Those two
talking.
things are
You've been
not
talking.
connected.
You've been talking a
Section
lot.
230
No,
and
One
public-
second. You've been talking a lot about government regulation of speech and how bad that is. I can name government regulation of speech that everyone on this panel will support. It's called the First Amendment, right? The First Amendment is government defending speech. And so when it comes to these digital public squares, if we're going to give them a handout, we need to defend the ideals.
I don't believe the
First
First Amendment
is
should
not
compel
regulation,
speech.
it's a right.
I don't believe the First Amendment should compel speech, and you're trying to compel the speech of these private entities.
So we care
These
about the
corporate
private
persons.
entities, and meanwhile, free speech dies.
No,
That's the reality.
Here's,
of it.
but here's what happened. If you follow John's logic and apply public square rules to Facebook and Twitter, then Twitter will have to host porn because porn is protected under First Amendment. Facebook would
Twitter
have
hosts
to
porn now.
Facebook
Do
would
you
have
not
to
see the
host
porn on Twitter?
violent. No, I don't see it. I don't know where you
Hold
go.
on. The point here is a conversation, not to score points back.
I get bombarded by Bernie
let's-
bro porn
let's,
every time I say something critical.
Okay. Let's complete this point, and then if people want to have questions, we're going to take some questions here. But I'm interested in this public square question, and would like to hear from the other two who haven't commented on this.
Yes, there is a public square, but the public square is bigger than these entities. These entities exist within the public square and operate their own private networks. The solution to this is to have more of these entities inside the public square, which is big. But the solution is not for government to come in and regulate what they do. There's no other entity. I mean, you say that you don't want government to do it, but there's no other entity. Pulling Section 230 is a death sentence because content moderation is required for these entities to exist. And we've seen it anytime anybody has tried to create an entity that doesn't have content moderation.
But,
And by the way,
you're right.
you don't need Section 230 if you're not doing content moderation because the court precedent is that it is content moderation. It is content moderation that puts you in the position of acting as a publisher.
I think sort of I land somewhere between, but it's appropriate. I guess I land somewhere close to the middle. I don't like the idea of government mandating it, but I think all these companies need to embrace the public square idea. Because why the hell should we as taxpayers support them if they don't? Because ultimately, like I said, they are, under your philosophy, okay, more sites can crop up and maybe a few of them will even be conservative and we can have it. ghettos don't really work well for people.
No, they don't.
Doesn't turn out well for
So
them.
if people would line
They
up,
don't, and that's
if people would line up for
and that's
questions, we're going to
constraining
take
their
some
behavior
questions.
right now.
But before we do that, Jeffrey Wernick is here with Parler. Wanted to say make a few comments about what he's doing.
I don't think we're going to end on time. Thanks for your end on time.
Do you want to say something, or Jeffrey? If not, we can take questions. It's up to you. Okay. Just tell us what you're doing. You can come up here. Or you can stay. You can stand right there if you want. They can hear. As long as they can hear you.
Do I need a microphone?
You do.
Need it for
They're
the live
recording.
stream.
They're
They need
recording
it
it.
for a live stream.
I'm an investor in Parler, and I'm a board member of Parler. The reason why I invested in Parler is, I'll give it a little bit of brief background on me. I'm a University of Chicago trained economist. Actually, University of Chicago has a Stigler Center, and I don't think there's any university that's better known for supporting free markets than University of Chicago Center. And the Stigler Center came out with a report that disagrees with the CEA report. So the CEA report, because they did it, doesn't mean it's the ultimate authority in with respect to that. Part of the problem also is how you think about antitrust. Okay, I actually did some work on antitrust, and what used to be and sometimes used as approach is what's called a theory of contestable markets. The question is not how concentrated the market is, but how contestable it is. Okay, going back to whatever description they have of Facebook and Google and the other platforms and Twitter, right now the return on capital of Google is 44%, and the return on capital of Facebook is 51%. Okay, in a competitive marketplace, if you earn significantly above your cost of capital, you generally assume the market will arbitrage that, so that competition will bring that cost of capital down. Okay, if anything, their return on capital is growing, not contracting, which means the degree of market power they have is growing, not contracting. So, if you studied it from the perspective of using the concentration indices and not necessarily contestability of markets, you would come up with a very different interpretation of whether they are monopolies, oligopolies, and subject to being broken up, as opposed to whether there is really a competitive marketplace out there. Given the fact that historically we've never seen any companies, okay, in the history of mankind, be able to generate those type of return on capital as a longer period of time as they've been able to do it and have it even grow, that's an indication that the market is not contestable, okay? The second thing about respect
So are
to
you
Section
doomed to
230
failure then? Is Parler doomed to failure?
What?
Or you're saying you're doomed to failure then?
Parler.
I'll get to that next.
Quickly.
Okay. The second thing, going back to the question of Section 230, okay, Reed Hunt, who was at the FCC at the time Section 230 was passed, he basically has said that how Section 230 is being applied today is a perversion of what the intent was. So, and one independent third party has calculated the value of the Section 230 waiver, and it's been estimated for the top 3 companies, the value of that waiver, the capitalized value of that waiver immunity exception is worth $1 trillion. Okay? That's a pretty decent subsidy. So if people don't like government interference, they don't mind the government interfering to give a subsidy to the most powerful companies who are difficult to contest, a $1 trillion subsidy. Okay? Going back to also the comment about the fact, and again, I don't want to be the straw man that says I believe in regulation, so I don't want you to start saying because I'm saying this, I believe in regulation. Okay? But but what you have now is a platform that advertises itself as a public square to get all your data. Okay?
That's correct.
So they advertise public data, and they basically entice you to say, let me tell you, if all these platforms had the rules they have today when they first started, they never would have scaled. So what happens is, there's a concept of bargaining power, okay? When you first come to my door, I want you to come in and I'm so nice to you, because I need you and you don't need me. Once everybody's on my platform and I've taken all your data, you have a lot of economic value tied into my platform. So you can't leave, okay? I know I got you locked up. Okay, so like the question I asked to sit back and say is, I'll ask you a different question. Okay, I'm risking my capital in Parler to hopefully challenge it, and I'm not asking for breaks from government. What I'm looking for is to find people who will say, I want there to be competition. That's what you want, right? Either you want there to be competition, or you want to get hands on your knees and beg to either, I'm going to follow you, tell me your speech code and I'll moderate it according to what you're telling me I should moderate it, or I'm going to, every time you tell me I need to remove something that you don't like, I'm just going to remove it and I'm going to be very compliant. To some extent it is true that because of these platforms we got to 2016, but because of 2016 we're seeing the effort to sit back and say we don't want a repeat of 2016, so now we have to take action to make sure that 2016 never happens again. So what's gonna happen is Twitter right now is sitting back and testing. I can tell you what's gonna happen after November. After November, everything you post, Twitter's gonna have these experts, and these experts are gonna say everything you say is a lie. Okay? And then it's gonna be like a driver's thing. And you're gonna be counted, this is a lie, this is a lie, this is false information. And where'd I find it from? I found it from Google, which is Google has determined that we're the arbiter of truth. So we're gonna moderate our algorithm to make sure you're all a liar, and then Facebook, and we're gonna call everybody liars. We're gonna ban everybody, okay, who doesn't comply with the terms and conditions, or to the extent that we won't ban, we're saying we really didn't ban you. You just told too many lies according to our fact checker. It's not that we're removing you, it's the fact checker is removing you because the fact checker says you're a serial liar. Okay, that's the future if there's no competition.
Well, if I believe that, I would be an investor in Parler.
Let's take some
I don't believe that.
What I'm trying to do.
Let's take some questions. We want to get some questions here. So do you have thank you.
I spoke too much. Okay.
So Inez, and we're going to try to do these. If people would just quickly, we'll try to get as many as we can. So Inez, go.
So I'm very much in Matt's position where I'm deeply concerned about this, but then when solutions are presented, they either seem too radical or too not successful, actually. But to this half of the panel here, you've argued that Google, Facebook, et cetera, they're not monopolies because they compete against each other in the same space and they replace each other over time with new companies, right? MySpace moving to Facebook. And furthermore, why they're dealing with all these SJW eruptions, I would call it, within their own companies and with their own tech workers. I would say the reason for all of that is while they have different business models and while they don't compete with each other necessarily in the traditional way we think about it in economics, they are a monoculture. And the reason that but that also argues against breaking them up because smaller versions of the same thing may be just as hostile to conservative voices as some of these big companies. But I guess my question would be, do you acknowledge that this cultural sort of monopoly, they have a cultural monopoly among each other. They all have very, very close to the same views when it comes to how they interact with conservative views. And that's why people feel frustrated because they don't feel there's competition. If you're banned from one, chances are, now Facebook a little bit different now, but if you're banned from one, chances are you're not going to be able to find another major platform that won't ban you for the same speech. So if that concerns you, one, does that concern you? And two, if that concerns you, what do we do about it?
Great. Quick. Go ahead.
It concerns me to some degree. I think probably less than the folks on this end of the panel. But I believe in the power of the marketplace, and I believe that their ability to do that is constrained by their fear of turning into a ghetto, because we've seen that these ghettos fail again and again and again. I think they can only push things so far before forces step in and adjust that. But I will say that the leadership of these entities is better than you're giving them credit for. The monoculture exists in sort of the mid to lower ranks here, and it's a big problem that's based on the divide in our country between the urban centers and the rest of the country, and that exists because of the complete disaster that higher education is in. But it also, this exists in the big banks and all kinds of crap across corporate woke America.
So quick add to that, or then we want to get to the next question.
Yeah, of course it's a huge problem, and that gets to the crux of the problem, that they are a corporate a monoculture that doesn't like conservatives, and it's one of the points we haven't talked about, it's very international culture. The globalist view of America that wants to restrict illegal immigration is, means they cannot stand anybody who takes that view.
So, okay, this is like lightning round, so, okay, go.
This will be a lightning round. My name's Tom Speciale. I'm running for U.S. Senate in Virginia, and I think we're missing the point here. The point is that these organizations, these businesses have commodified people. They've turned our data, our lives, what we think, what we say, what we believe, into money in people's pockets. Would you all agree with that? That this is about money? It's not about information. And so I think everybody in this audience probably agrees with that. Some of you guys, I don't really care what your opinion is, because guess what? All of this comes down to a very simple fact. Most of what is on Google, on CNN, on Fox News, it's all opinions. It's not fact. You're selling opinions to essentially commodify people's lives, to make money off them. That's these organizations that call themselves news organizations are actually entertainment companies. They're either a liberal entertainment company or they're a conservative entertainment company. That's it. And that's really what we're talking about. And that's what we're talking about up here with a conservative brand of Facebook. It's a different form of commodification of our lives. So there is only one answer to this, I believe.
Okay, so
and I just want you to tell me whether or not this is the answer or not. Absolute critical thinking needs to be put back into our schools. With critical thinking, we can shut off the bullshit.
John, you want to answer this?
On all of the internet.
I was just going to defend big tech real quick. I think it's a service we all really like. And, I know there's the idea that they're harvesting our data and all that is very concerning. But we do it, and we really enjoy it because we like community, because we like this digital public square that is effectively like turning the public square doesn't even compare. I can talk to 10,000 people online. I can't talk to 10,000 people at a park bench.
So the other half of my job is fighting government surveilling you all guys. And let me scare you a little more. Not only government surveils you without a warrant, that's a given. On top of that, every single grocery store, bank, insurance company, every single company you interact with has all of the data, your telecommunication company, all of the data on you cannot even imagine. It's not just the tech companies.
Right.
Your data is out there. It's not just the tech companies.
Every company is a tech company. That's the problem. And they all have our data. So, yes, we do need a privacy regulation, American privacy regulation, so that maybe our data is our data.
So we're going to keep going. I want to make one quick point. I'm an educator. You guys are experts on this. But one thing I do know is that I am deeply concerned about the effect of how a lot of this technology in the hands of young people is destroying the educational system. And I see it firsthand in the classroom. So that the effect on how they learn and how they think is disturbing to me. I know it's different. Yes, sir.
That was my brother before. He's the smarter one. I became a cop. So I was NYPD. Very simple. Hate speech and threats. Difference between hate speech, when someone says, I don't like you, or I don't like this, is not anything that needs to be banned. Okay, not that I agree with it or not, but it just doesn't get banned. It can't. It's not our, what's a threat, okay, is a threat. So we seem to not be in a proper place, because it seems like there are threats out there, and we've heard them, where arrests aren't made, and yet people are being banned when all they did is just say how they feel about somebody. So we're all screwed up.
Okay, so questions, can we draw any lines here between actual threats and something less?
Foundationally, the problem is, in this country, one of the most important values of this country is freedom, and online, the most important value is safety. So they care more if you say something that's going to trigger somebody else. They want to ban that speech. When in the rest of America, you can walk around and say it walk down the street, and if anybody doesn't like it, they can yell at you, and that's the freedom we have.
Not if you're in a private business, though. They'll throw you out. If you're in a private diner and you're saying something offensive to somebody that's in there, the owner will throw you out.
Right, but what they're trying to do.
It's very simple. There's laws or whatever. It's harassment, it's a threat, or it's not. You know what I mean? So it's just very simple about that. As far as surveilling, you can surveil somebody. You don't have their data without having a warrant.
Yeah, but there's
where
a
they
difference
can
if the
search them.
business, if you're
It's
in a
different.
restaurant
Yeah.
and you're
I mean, I
telling
know,
somebody
I know.
F you,
Yeah.
you may have a free speech to do that.
Then you don't. No. Then,
But the
then
owner of
it's
the business
harassment.
also has the right to throw you out.
Then
Your
it's
point has been made.
harassment. I
Your
know
point has been made.
very
Thank you.
well. I was on the
Thank you.
street for many years.
We got
If
you.
someone
We
says
got
F
you.
you. Yeah.
Sorry, this is.
Yeah.
We got time for one more question.
Yeah.
After
Lightning
this guy.
round.
They're going to stick around and ask you more questions. We got a lot here. You got quite. I want everybody to get the last opportunity to say something here at the end too.
I'll try to make this very, very brief.
And it better be a good question.
It is. I think I got to the heart of the matter. All right.
Okay.
So I'm Cuban American, and I was having a conversation on Facebook. A friend of a friend called me a gusano bootlicker. Now, gusano is a slur for Cuban Americans invented by the Castro regime for people who are, conservatives, who are counter-revolutionary. And I thought it was hilarious, and I said, it's funny that, this privileged white chick is saying that Cubanos, that you're using an anti-Hispanic slur. And she went off, said all sorts of hateful stuff, cuss and whatnot. So I flagged her for harassment. She flagged me for harassment. Guess which one of us got banned? That was me. A little while ago, while I was working as a journalist on Twitter, in a fit of pique, I replied to the LeBron James thing when he was talking about how, free speech kind of sucks, like China's pretty great. I replied, and I said, I called him a communist whore, which, okay, that's kind of like a little extreme. I understand that. But Twitter banned me, and, they didn't ban me. They suspended me, and then I waited like 2 weeks. They never responded, dealt with that. I'll get to my point.
Yeah,
super quick, I promise. So if you look at Twitter's actual guidelines, they say that hate speech is what they accuse me of. It is a threat of violence, and it is connected to a hateful statement about a protected group. Communist whores aren't protected groups. Section 230 says that you are allowed to moderate as long as you do so in good faith. And that's the most frustrating thing about this, kind of debate we're having in our culture, is that Google and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube are censoring speech. They're specifically censoring conservative speech. There is proof that, for instance, they censored Ben Shapiro. They censored anybody who was related to Ben Shapiro. So if I watch Ben Shapiro's videos and like them, and then like somebody else's video, they censor those. If you are not, what I'm like to ask the audience left side of the stage is, how can you say that tech companies are censoring? Yeah, stage right. Audience left side of the stage.
You want to ask them what?
How can you say that big tech is operating in good faith per Section 230?
Okay, so
if they're not even following their own guidelines.
Comment on here, but you guys comment. This is kind of our last point.
They
I
deny
want
that
everybody to
they're
have
doing
a
it.
comment
Yeah.
here. Thank you for
Yeah.
your question. Last question. So you want to start?
The good faith provision doesn't mean that they do what is just and right and moral in the world. No one, depending on who you ask, we all have different opinions about that. Good faith means they're not on purpose moderating speech that they're targeting it. And that good faith is not the key part of Section 230 to begin with. So I get it, you don't like the rules of Twitter. I don't like the rules of Twitter too. They don't ban people who harass me.
So
Okay.
Dan, your comment. Last comment.
Okay, the last comment is, if we don't fix this problem, conservatives will cease to exist online. That's flat out. You will, not just banning conservative speech, banning the Bible. But I know several people who've gotten blasphemy complaints from Pakistan. So the companies will, if they're going to bow to foreign governments, which they already are doing, they'll be able to ban the Bible. They'll be able to ban any speech they don't like, because that's what this all comes down to. Banning speech one side doesn't like, and if we don't stop it, we're done.
If only Reagan could hear
Chris,
you right now.
Chris?
That's the state that's doing that, though. Let us not be like Pakistan. That's what I'm saying.
Use a different search engine. I suggest
Mr. Schweppe, go ahead.
Downstairs.
Yeah, use them.
Who cares if you use a different search engine? How many people in this room have
Last, John?
Look, I think this is a conversation we need to keep having. I really appreciate Chris and Ash doing this panel, and I understand that there's some very emotional sentiment in this room. And look, it's a conversation we need to have. I think 230 should be rewritten. I think we need to look at how to do that. The status quo is not working.
Great. And this is Tim. Tim, I'm sorry, I know you were here. Tim White is with Yippy. Thank you for another example, just really quickly, because we're done.
I understand.
Just,
I will not belabor anybody on this. Can you guys?
Yep.
First, I'll tell you, great to be in this forum and hearing, within sort of a composite, somewhat homogeneous thought process, to hear some great debate on this, because I'm working in this space myself. So I appreciate, and I think the panel and everybody here deserves a little bit of a self-applause, if you don't mind, for that, just to say thank you for doing this and having an honest debate rather than having it where it's one-sided. It's good to hear. I can say that both sides have big things to it. I have recently taken over a company and trying to rebrand it into a search engine that provides that direct access, and I think my things I'll throw into this are, one is, there's a little bit of difference in freedom of the press and individuals, whether or not they're press or not. That's a great conversation to have. There's a little bit of difference in its First Amendment and whether or not it's regulated or not. But one of the things that I believe that we all need is, and what the press was supposed to do and the media is supposed to do, and that's one of the reasons why we do this, is to provide an informed public. And that's really what I'm standing behind, is to say we want to make this fact-based. We want to make it where there is a search engine that allows people to look at the facts, and we will do our best and darnest to do that. DuckDuckGo is a great play to look at not collecting user data, but still the money that goes behind it. And I think what everybody is saying is you have to have the funding behind it is driven by ads. And we are all part of this as a community, so we make a decision individually to do this. I'm a believer in the market-driven place out of behind it. I think that we actually have to, as a community, decide that we're going to put funding behind this. We're going to have to buy things that are not driven in that. Now, I will say Google is great and for doing certain things, and we have a thriving economy because of it. And I had some serious discussions when Safe Harbor changed to GDPR and a bunch of the restrictions that were done on user data and how that user data was collected and what they were using for that. The biggest concern that came out of large corporations was the fact that it was going to affect the e-commerce. E-commerce drives our economy, period. That's the way things are. Whether we like it or not, that's the way it is. So if you're buying a blue shirt, Google's a great place to go. I mean, if you're trying to do something in a community, a lot of these big tech companies, they actually do this very well. They provide you with a purview into the world that gives you something that's probably the reasonable answer you want. If you're really trying to make it fact-based and you're really trying to look at unfettered, and this is about individual liberty and access to information, which I think is a staunch thing we should all stand for, that's what we try to drive. We need to start looking at technology companies that are doing that.
Thank you, Tim White. Tim White's with you at Yippy. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists. It's been a great conversation, and just remind everybody, the objective with this panel, and the previous panel, and the family, and the one before that, is this is a period when there's a lot of open conversation about politics that's going on in our society. It's imperative that we all think these questions through and get the right grounding so we can go forward and figure out how to be successful in politics, because our country needs us to be successful now more than ever. So I thank the panelists, I thank all of you, and thank you all for coming to CPAC.